Welcome to Down Home Horror, where we keep the hall lights on for you. I'm Alex,
And I'm Amber.
and it's so nice that you're here today because we're going to try something new. So if you're new, congrats! This is new for us. This is new for you. We're going to go on this journey together. If you've been with us for a while, congrats! It's going to be a journey for us together because new idea, new fun stuff. I don't have a cute intro for it. We're just we're going to do some creepy pastas. Well, yeah, why not? It's getting close to the creepy season. I think creepypastas have had a great way of shaping horror in a modern sense too. Without creepypastas, we wouldn't have had a whole Slender Man thing, right? So there's a lot of basis, as a love note to horror, how it has continued to influence horror. So we might as well pick some. I have picked a few of my favorites. Amber, what was your methodology?
Mine was let's pick random ones that sound interesting so we can all be surprised together.
Of that, right? I was a little worried, like, oh, what if we pick the same ones? And I get to hear new ones. And that's so exciting. I am super silly though. I'm aware of the term creepypasta. It is a play on the words copy paste, right? It's supposed to be have this, I don't know, I'm gonna call it our modern pulp fiction, right? However, I didn't realize there's a whole ass website called creepypasta.com where all these are stored. I had no idea. So I had a lot of fun going through, diving, digging around, getting the muck, and picking some fun ones for us to read. Now, our system here, I'm going to kick it off to Amber, who will start us off, and we'll go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. We each have supposed to do 3 stories. These are Amber's and these are mine. Together they make 6. Wow, wonderful. But we got 6 stories to share with you, and we hope you enjoy this narration, if you will. I think we're gonna have some fun with it. So, Amber, what are we starting off with? What are we doing?
So I picked it's very short, but I thought, it's a nice little taste of what we have to offer here. This was posted way back in 2013, which is interesting to me. I didn't realize that until right now. But
Perfect. Yes, good.
but it is called Kite Flying. Full credit to the user Stupid Dial Up.
Good.
I
Good
like
username.
that. Yeah. So I have to get my narrator voice ready because y'all know how I be doing that. So
get that vocal fry.
So this is Kite Flying. All right. Look at it go, sweetie, the loving father joyfully called out to his little girl, pointing upward towards the kite flying high above the secluded beach. Here, baby, you try. The little girl stood there shy, timid, and melancholy as she stared skyward at the pale, flapping kite. This particular kite always reminded the girl of her missing mother. Each of them, the mother and the kite, seemed to share the exact same colorful tattoos.
Oh no, I don't like it. My skin. I can feel my skin suddenly. I don't like it. That's a good one.
For something that's so short and it just like gets to the point, it's like creepy. And I love it. I love stuff like that.
Set the scene. Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. As I get ready to share mine, I feel like maybe we should do a disclaimer of some trigger warnings.
Oh boy.
I laugh nervously. As I was kind of briefly scrolling through this, I should have scrolled through it a little bit before we started recording. However, hey, this first one I want to share is the Rugrats theory. Talking about the spooky theory behind the cartoon. Rugrats. This came out in 2011, and the author is anonymous, so that is our anonymous source for this. And yeah, just know that since it's based off Rugrats, it's going to be harm to children. There's going to be a mention of the thing that rhymes with some abortion, and we'll just kind of roll with the punches on this, right?
Are you about to ruin my childhood?
Yeah, congrats.
Cool.
I'm going to share it this time, and if we end up liking doing our creepypastas, and if you all like our creepypastas, I know there's an Ed and Eddie theory as well, and I know there's a Courage the Cowardly Dog theory. But the Rugrats theory is the one I think that started off that kind of chain reaction, I think. So, Let's see. The original version, right? There's two versions. Here's the original. The Rugrats really were a figment of Angelica's demonic and unimaginable imagination. Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother. That's why Chaz is a nervous wreck all the time. Tommy was born in 1988, but he was stillborn, and that's why Stu is constantly in the basement making toys for the son who never had a chance to live. The DeVilles had an abortion in 1990. Angelica couldn't figure out whether it would be a boy or a girl, thus, she created twins. As for the all grown up version of the show, the teenage Angelica became addicted to various narcotics, which further aggravated her schizophrenia, bringing her back to her childhood, and thus the creation she obsessed over. Because of the time lapse between the present and the last time she interacted with her creations, she made them older. Angelica was constantly taking hits of acid, constantly. Angelica, just constant hits of acid. So she would never have to live without her creations, who were her only company. In a judgmental world, Angelica's mom actually died of a heroin overdose in 1982, just after Angelica was born. And Drew, in his depression, married a gold digging lady that Angelica idolized because she fooled herself into thinking it was her real mom, but always had a concept of her mom, Cynthia, and took a Barbie doll and made it after her mom's image, wearing an unwashed orange dress and having a jacked up hair, which is why she is so attached to it. Later in life, she followed in her mom's footsteps with drugs and everything, dying of an overdose at the age of 13 when All Grown Up was canceled. The only Rugrat, not to be fictional, however, was the unborn Tommy's brother, Dill. However, Angelica didn't know the difference between Dill and her creations, although Dill didn't follow her commands. After endless crying and a refusal to disappear like the others did when Angelica was angry with him, she hit him. Due to this, he sustained a brain injury. As he grew up, damage became more evident, as shown in All Grown Up. He lived as an outcast, being ridiculed for his weirdness. The immense guilt over this is what led Angelica to her drug use and is what led Angelica to uncreate the Rugrats briefly until her experience with hallucinogenics. Now, we think it's done. We think we're going over the top. No, we got more. On a trip to Paris to find love, Chaz married a woman named Kira. He was actually going to marry a different woman named Coco, but she just wanted him for his money, who had a daughter named Kimmy that was torn from her because she was also addicted to drugs. There's this theme here. He lost his mind, and more stuff happened that I don't feel comfortable sharing on the YouTubes. Upon returning to America, Chaz and Kira married, and it was actually a really happy and romantic story. Susie was actually Angelica's only friend who entertained the thought of Angelica's creations for her sake. Angelica spent the last days of her life in the back of the school cafeteria, imagining friends around her and playing with the lives of her creations. The other version, which is just kind of rehashing the same thing, that basically all the kids never really existed. Angelica just had some trauma in her life that spurned all these into creation. I think the Ed and Eddie one is a little bit more creative because it talks about how all the kids died in a different time era, and that's why like the personalities are the way they are, where they're all so different. But this was like the one that kicked off all the what's messed up ways to interpret our favorite childhood stories. And gosh, I was a freshman in undergrad when this came out. I remember internet freaked out over it. So there we go. That's your twisted version of Rugrats.
I'm gonna go cry now. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Oh, fuck. Hopefully, my next one here doesn't send me into an existential crisis.
Sure, of course.
My next one. All right, so this one is called The Vintage Carousel. This came out in 2019. Credit to James Hacking. I wish my last name was Hacking. If that's not the perfect like comedic like dark comedy slasher horror movie name, I don't know what is.
You're right. Good point.
Somebody capitalize on that. James Hacking. Sorry. Okay. So it says I'm gonna be James for a second. All right, y'all. Just
okay, be James.
Bear with me. I grew up in a pretty crummy town, Nowheresville, a real one-horse piece of crap with a small municipal park that housed a vintage carousel since time immemorial. The same elderly guy sat in his little booth in the center, no matter the weather. I would sometimes watch while the ornately painted wooden horses paraded by him for the billionth time. He would always stare back at me and smile a little. Me and my friend Billy used to invent names for the old man when he was out of earshot. Immature stuff like... That's fucking funny. Sorry. some shit I would say. Immature stuff like horse's ass and prick draw McGraw.
Oh.
Amazing. There wasn't much else to do around town. The park was essentially the only place for teenagers to hang out. Billy and I spent many a weekend hearing an endless loop of gaudy organ music, which more than likely drove old Prickdraw insane long ago. Late one spring afternoon, we were in the park, as usual, thinking up new monikers for old PD when he surprised us by emerging from his booth. This was a rare occurrence, and cheerfully waving us toward him. This carousel sure is a beauty, ain't it? Say, did you cowboys ever hear about the legend about why each horse is so darn pretty? Nah, sneered Billy. Enlighten us. PD leaned back against one of his trusty steeds and stared wistfully at us. Well, the story goes that each of these beasts is secretly alive, but you only see their true form if you switch on the power after sunset. Why else do you think I never operate the old girl at night? That's a real big pile of horse shit, chuckled Billy, which made me blush a little. I was a punk, but I minded my manners. PD gave us both his usual bland grin. You fellas should mosey on home. It's getting late, and I'd best call it a day. But we stuck around, as Billy had decided to call the weird geezer's bluff, especially since we'd noticed that he sometimes absent-mindedly left the key in the ignition of the ancient machinery, and that night was such an occasion. We waited a couple hours until it was good and dark, virtually pitch black, and then crept into the booth and began hitting random buttons and fiddling with a rusty dial. Eventually, the thing sputtered to life, quite literally. We didn't notice the screams at first, as the organ ditty was almost deafening from where we were standing, but we could see clearly enough. On one post where wooden horses had once stood were human beings, impaled, some through the chest, some through other parts of their anatomy. Thank you for sparing us the details.
Sure.
Some wore old clothing, some had faces I recognized, locals who had vanished over the years. Their cacophony was unbearable. Billy and I hugged each other, trapped in the epicenter. Somehow, over that dreadful noise, we heard Prickdraw's cackling voice. Reckon there's room for a couple more? That's it.
That's unfortunate. That's it.
I trusted Prickdraw. I did,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, even though there were no signs that I should have. I trusted him.
Well, you would be part of the carousel then.
I like carousels, so that's fine.
Fine.
Well, the horse that I turn into better be pretty if I'm gonna be on the carousel. All right.
Oh, I turn into one that has like chipped paint.
I like that.
And that way I don't get sat on as much.
Anything to not be sat on more often than I should be.
It's a common occurrence, much like dodging quicksand in real life. It's also my life goal is to just avoid being sat on as much as possible. I think that's fair.
I think I'm gonna add that to a new life goal of mine, because it wasn't until this moment that I realized, I don't really want to be sat on. So here we are.
More power to everyone who wants to turn into a horse on a carousel to be sat on.
Yeah.
Not for me. You could have that experience. I don't want it.
No, yeah, I changed my mind. I'll stay away from Prickdraw McGraw.
Hard with that kind of name.
Oh.
All right. So this next one I have is called I Grew Up, and it's written, credited by Samantha Miyake. Okay, this is also another first person, so it's not really me. All right, everyone, don't get confused. It's not really about me. Okay. All right. My father died from a pulmonary hypertension when I was only 4 years old. I still remember the night he had the heart attack, watching from the third floor window of my great-grandmother's bedroom as he was wheeled on a stretcher across the driveway. Hell, I still remember the bare and twisted trees in the front yard, their shadows creeping like eerie tendrils across the lawn. This has little to do with the story I'm about to tell, but it illustrates a point to all those who have questioned my validity in the past. My memories of an early childhood have always been very clear, especially during that time of loss in my life. This is not something I imagined. This is not a memory that is vague to me. I can remember that fateful night, and I am sure that I am remembering this perfectly. The real story started in the middle of October, not long before I lost my father. Halloween was my favorite day of the year, and the entire month leading up to it was always a time of excitement. There would be nights where I'd lay awake in bed, thrilled by the thought of dressing up as a cat for the third year in a row, and what have you. One night in particular, after my mom stuck her head in her room and scolded me for still being up, I forced myself to close my eyes and attempted to drift off. I was almost there, just on the edge of sleep, when I heard the door slowly creak ajar. Being a clever kid, I thought it was my mom and kept my eyes closed while feigning cartoon snores that, in reality, she totally would not buy. It was my assumption that my mom would eventually leave, satisfied that I had finally nodded off. But instead, the door creaked even wider, and heavier footsteps began to trot into the bedroom. Eventually, I dared to peek with one eye open to see what was going on. What I saw was not my mom at all, but a monster. He was by no means scary. In fact, he was kind of cute. Covered entirely in thick orange fur, he towered over my bed with a wide grin of pointed teeth. Two gnarled ram horns sat on either side of his head, and due to his size, they almost scraped against the ceiling. The monster did not acknowledge my sleeping little brother in the bed across the room. Instead, he held a clawed hand out for me to take. I'm not sure why I thought it was okay, but I accepted his gesture and placed my teeny palm within his and held it tightly. Slowly, he led me across the room and towards a blank space of wall where my mother had been intending to put some sort of wicker furniture. I watched in curiosity as the orange monster gently scraped a wide door shape against the wallpaper with his claw, and in an instant, a gateway had appeared. Still leading me with the utmost care, he stepped through, and we were engulfed in a bright flash of light that forced me to squint. As it faded and my eyes adjusted, I found that we were no longer in my bedroom. We were in what I could only assume to be his world, and it was a world that I marveled at. Cobblestone marketplace stretched on before us, filled with stands and carts manned by every kind of monster you could picture. Witches cackled from a booth full of frothing potions, and they gave me a candy corn as we passed by them. Vampires chilled beneath the shade of an awning, selling decorative vials of blood that glowed like obscene stained glass. There were werewolves, skeletons, mummies, and so much more, all of them busy preparing for Halloween, and all of them very friendly. Making our way through the market seemed to take hours, but eventually led out into a wide park filled with trees and another glimmering gateway at its entrance. My monster guided me there, and after exchanging a warm embrace, he ushered me through the gates and gave a cheerful wave goodbye. And then I woke up in my bed. My brother was still sleeping soundly across the room, and the blank wall was back to being blank. During breakfast, I told my family the wild tale. My mom reacted the way you'd expect the mother of a 4-year-old to react to some made-up story. My dad just smiled weakly. It was a dream, and I figured that was the end of it. But it had been such an exciting one, and I wished I could have had it all over again. 1 year later, my wish came true. It was the middle of October again, and though it was still an exciting time, I no longer had trouble sleeping. But once again, one night I awoke to the creak of my bedroom door, and I opened my eyes to see my orange monster shuffling into the bedroom with a sheepish smile. I sprang out of bed to meet him, and yet again he drew the doorway on the wall with his claw and took me to his world. Everyone was excited to see me, and all of them remembered my name. The witches gave me candy again, the vampires hissed hellos. It went on the same way as the last dream, winding through the busy marketplace until we reached the gates of the park and bid each other farewell. The next year I had the dream again, and the year after that, again, and it started to become a yearly Halloween tradition that only I knew about. It wasn't until I was 11 that the dreams began to change. That year, none of the monsters in the marketplace seemed happy to see me. They gave me and my orange monster stern looks as we passed, whispering in hushed voices that I could not understand. There was no candy for me, no greetings or smiles. It was an unnerving trip, and I think that my monster knew this, for he began to pick up his pace and was quick to lead me to the park. When I was 13, the marketplace became a hostile environment. All the kind monsters I had come to know for almost a decade shouted in harsh voices. They pointed with bony fingers, spitting angrily and ordering us to leave. For the first time, my monster actually picked me up and carried me through, not stopping until I was safely at the gateway. I was 16 when the nightmares finally came. My monster had come for me, like he always did each year, but something about him was different. His plush orange fur had grown thin and wispy, and his ram horns had various chips and cracks in them. He still held out his hand and took me through that doorway, but that was a grave mistake. We were chased through the marketplace, bitten and clawed and slashed at. My ears were filled with whispers loud enough to drown in, but nobody's mouths were moving, and it almost seemed like they were being spoken in tongues. I was too big for my monster to carry, but I let him pull me along to the park. The other creatures followed us all the way to the gateway, not leaving any time for goodbyes. I was shoved through and woke up drenched in sweat in my bedroom. 17. My monster was no shadow of what he once was when he came to me. There was no chasing in this dream, no sense of imminent danger. There was, however, a massive dread that hung over us as we ambled through the cobblestone marketplace. The creatures stopped still at their booths, black holes in the place of their eyes and mouths. They turned and stared as we passed. They were otherwise motionless. My monster had to stop often to catch his breath before we made it to the park. Before I entered the gates, I enveloped him in my arms and squeezed him tight like I had done as a child. He looked at me with saddened eyes, but grinned with those big teeth and ushered me forward like he always did. When I woke up, I found my eyes were wet with tears. The next year, I wondered if perhaps I would have the dream again. It was very late into October, much later than usual, and I had yet to dream my dream. On Halloween night, after late night partying with my friends, I dreamed in a daze that someone was clawing at my walls. I got out of bed and moved cautiously across the floor to see that the light-filled doorway to my monster's world was wide open. My bedroom door, on the other hand, was shut, and I was completely alone. I went through the gateway by myself, wondering if perhaps he was waiting on the other side. Again, I was met with change when I found the long cobblestone street was empty, void of all structures in life. The only thing that accompanied me were the long smears of dark brown blood that scattered, and the scatterings of what I could only assume to be flesh. There was a horrible, rotting smell that made me cover my nose with the collar of my pajamas and forced me to make the familiar walk with trembling legs. For hours I walked, my bare feet slipping in blood and gore, staining my toes and making me shudder. I called out, but was only met with the sounds of the wind whispering through the streets. As the marketplace ended and gave birth to the park, I came to a halt, and my stomach churned violently. There were corpses in my path now, of the witches, the vampires, the werewolves, and monsters. They were mangled, horribly disfigured, and discarded in piles of carelessly. No longer were they eyeless or cruel looking, but the friendly creatures I'd imagined when I was young. I was slipping through more blood, more flesh, and now dodging bodies and bloody bits of candy underfoot. Straight ahead was the gates of the park, and standing before them was a familiar sight. The recognizable shape of my monster was waiting for me, but his back was turned. His fur was also very patchy, I noticed, revealing a muscular gray body that bulged and twitched with veins. The closer I drew, the better I could hear his deep, rasping breaths. He did not turn to face me, but instead seemed hunched over something. My foot connected with a limb, and I tripped, yelping in surprise. The voice that came from my mouth was higher, though, suddenly much younger than that of an 18-year-old. The sudden cry made my monster freeze, and slowly he turned to face me. In his claws, he held the dismantled remains of some sort of corpse. His stinking brown blood stained his fur. When he saw me, he grinned with a new set of razor-sharp teeth. The smell of decay breezed out of his mouth, and I found myself gawking at the bits of flesh that dangled from in between his fangs. I was a child then, drowning in my adult pajamas and feeling my eyes well up with tears. I stumbled back to put space between us and choked back a tiny sob when he reached out for my hand. Why? I pleaded, overtaken with fear as he drew up to a much higher height and loomed over me. Because, he answered. It was the first time I had heard his voice, yet I knew that he did not sound that way. He spoke in a low rumble, wrong and inhuman, like something ancient and not of our world. You grew up. Again, he held his hand out with splayed open claws, but I did not take it. I shoved him backwards and went scurrying over the bodies below, making my way towards the gateway as quickly as I could. I awoke in my room with my mother standing over me, demanding to know why I was screaming in my sleep and if I needed to go to the hospital. I'm 23 now, and I haven't had the dream since, and if I'm being honest, I don't think I ever will. I still think about them from time to time, musing about it to my husband and friends. They always shake their heads at me, laughing and reminding me that nobody remembers things like that at such young ages. It must have been one dream, all thought up at once and made to feel as though it had been recurring. But I know that's not the case. I remember. I still remember.
Why do I want to cry? Because it's me. That's fucking why. That, obviously, we all know me by now. I'm an emotional wreck.
I am a sucker for the horror of growing up. Shocker. No, I thought that was a really well written and interesting way to kind of explore those themes.
Yeah, I liked that. I still want to cry though. Poor monster. It's not, I mean, it's not, I get it.
Right.
But it's sad.
Cute monster to scary monster.
Yeah. And it made me think of me also, because anybody that knows me will vouch for this. Even if I was sleeping, if a monster with like orange fur was just like, hey, I'd be like, absolutely, let's go. Like,
Fucking go.
you're so cute, and I want to go wherever you want to take me. It'd be like my best friend.
So here's the funny part, because I'd be like, cuss no. Nope, I'm not gonna do it.
Cuss no.
Cuss no, a scream, blanket overhead. And I like that. It's great because of our ending where I'm like, chicken dream for monsters, because I can't and she won't. Because it seems like the opposite in reality would really be what's happening here.
Well, here's the thing, right?
Okay, yeah.
Is like, again, I, as a person, am a sucker for like an underdog story, and for me, a monster that looks terrifying, but is like, you know, taking you to this place, which obviously you don't know at the time, but it's taking you to this place that's all like warm and fuzzy and like is part of your childhood and whatever. Like that to me is just like a wholesome, like, he's the underdog, because anybody else like you would be like, absolutely the cuss not. Yeah, exactly. But I would be like, no, like everybody doesn't know, like, nobody wants to be your friend, so like I'm gonna be your friend, and like that's me as a person in a nutshell. So I would be like, yep, we're gonna be best friends. I'm gonna protect you. Like anybody that tells you that you're ugly or that your fur is too orange or your teeth are too big or whatever, like, no, I'm gonna tell them, say it to my face. Don't say it to them. We're just,
let's go. I love that. Everyone get yourself an Amber.
But I did like the, like, how, you know, our fear and stuff of growing up was told in that story. They used very good descriptive terms and everything. Like I felt like I could see it,
visualize it.
Yeah, and I like that.
I know sometimes creepypastas can be like a little too descriptive.
Yeah.
Right? That was well written.
I liked it. Good. All right. So being that we are doing this as kind of an introduction into spooky season, we're gathering around my little campfire here to tell our creepypasta stories. I found one called One Last Trick or Treat, and I was like, I don't know what this is about, but it sounds perfect. This was written in 2019. Credit to L.Chan, who also has their socials credited as well. All of the links for these will be in the description as well, if you guys want to go read them yourself, or find out what other stuff that these people have, these wonderful writers have written. But this one is One Last Trick or Treat. It's that time of the year again. I know how I'm going to be spending Halloween. Same way I have for the past 2 years, slowly nursing a beer in the bar. Felt. Watching the glass sweat on that smooth wooden counter, staring at it till it goes warm in my hand. I'm not there to get drunk, I'm there to escape. I never want to be alone at home over Halloween night again. I promised the deputy that I wouldn't talk about that night. The town didn't need it. Hell, I even deleted the video. But now, with Halloween around the corner, it all comes back. Well, small town law enforcement doesn't care too much about the internet. I live in a small house at the end of the lane, another nondescript house down a row of its sisters, prefabricated mostly, far enough off the beaten path to be cheap, not so far as to be rural. Sorry. But I fucking hate it. But close. Pretty damn close. I didn't expect many kids to call around trick-or-treating come Halloween. It's a long road, and most children manage to fill their baskets long before they get to my place. Besides, I quite like the peace and quiet. Halloween used to be a good night to settle down and catch some of the classic horror movies on TV. I kept a couple bags of candy around just in case some kids actually made it all the way down the lane, but mostly it would be an evening all to myself. I can't quite remember what I was watching that night, probably because I had been enjoying an after-dinner beer and I may have gotten carried away, dozing off after one too many. I woke with a start. My beer had gone warm on the side table, my hand still curled around the can. I winced as I unwrapped my fingers. Something had woken me up. The TV droned in the background, the senseless drivel of late-night programming flickering across the room. Maybe it was just some high school kids out after some Halloween party, out on the streets, making some noise that woke me up. I checked the time, past midnight. I was glad that I'd invested in a little security for my house. Just the basics, really. A good camera to cover my front lawn, motion-activated lights around the front and back. I was trying to make the tough decision of whether to clear up the mess right there and then or just to kick the can down the road till the next morning when a loud rapping sound at the door shattered the silence. The can bounced off the floor, warm beer spraying across the bottom of my track pants. The shock had left me too numb even to swear. I had just set the can back upright when the knocking sounded again. That arrhythmic rap, increasingly impatient, the tempo building up as I stepped towards the door. I peered around the edge of the window. I saw nothing but my pale face in the glass. It was pitch dark outside. Why wasn't the light working? The knocking stopped. A tree branch, perhaps, or something else tapping on the porch? The peephole glared at me, that little glass orb suddenly bulging with some half-promised horror. I swallowed, or I tried. My throat was dry, the warm beer on the floor suddenly inviting. It's nothing, I said out loud, hoping that the familiar echo of my voice off the walls would ground me somehow. I walked up to the door and peered out, only seeing the orange cones cast by the streetlights a distance away. Nothing, I thought to myself, feeling childishly stupid. I sucked in a deep breath, feeling my lungs strain, then let the air stream out slowly. Then another knock. I turned back around to face the door. My heart punched at the inside of my chest, its crazed dance playing counterpoint to the knocking. I wasn't surprised to see my hand shake as I reached for the doorknob. Our town was a safe one, far from the troubles of the big cities, or so we'd read in the papers. We had little more to fear in the night than seeing our trash strewn across the yard by the nimble fingers of raccoons. I threw the door open. The porch lights winked on, suddenly blinding me. I blinked away the white spots from my vision. A pair of children stood on my porch. They must have been 9 or 10. I couldn't see much more of them because they were in the classic Halloween getup, a simple sheet draped over each one of them. A simple sheet draped over each of them, a pair of holes cut out for them to see through. A pair of small baskets for candy broke the smooth lines of the sheets. The toes of the brand new dress shoes peeked out from under the sheets. A boy and a girl, I thought. Trick or treat. Such a common refrain. I'd expected the words, but not the delivery. There were but 2 figures in front of me, yet their voices seemed to come from a great distance away. Trick or treat. The pair spoke again. I felt a little discomfited at the distortion in their voices. More than the weird volume, their voices seemed to blend into each other's, with some strange harmonic at play at the edges. It seemed almost as though there was a choir of 2 just there speaking to me. Treat, I guess, I said. More than anything, I wanted those 2 away from my house. The whole situation felt wrong, the familiar veneer of the season concealing something deeper. Something rotten, like that small panic when biting into a fruit and feeling that lack of resistance, your teeth sinking into soft mush instead of sweet flesh. For a moment, I blamed the haze of alcohol, the dregs of sleep clouding my judgment, but adrenaline had swept those far away. My fear was true. I turned to the counter where I kept my keys and grabbed for the bag of candy I had prepared for the occasion. I was half hoping that the 2 figures would be gone when I returned to the door, that they'd been a figment of my imagination, perhaps a shadow of some dream brought on by cheap horror movies and a cold pizza. I had no such luck. The pair hadn't moved an inch. They each raised their baskets. There was already an assortment of candy there. They'd had a good day. A little bit late for you guys to be out, isn't it? Where are your parents? And the only answer I got was an impatient shaking of the baskets, the rasp of candy wrappers rustling. I held out a handful of candy, ready to drop it and call it a night. I expected to see a small pale hand clutching at the handle of the basket. Instead, I saw the anemic matte sheen of plastic. The basket was draped off the plastic hand of some kind of store mannequin. I was more than thoroughly creeped out by this effective little trick. I shrugged. Maybe the voices were recorded, a little technology to bolster an otherwise traditional costume. I felt the fear melting away as I explained it to myself in my head. Sounds like me.
Point Amber.
Basically. Just of clever little children, probably with the help of an adult. Smart, I thought. It had certainly got me going for a while. Stay safe, I told them, dropping the last of the candy into the baskets. They didn't acknowledge me. They just stood still on the worn wooden boards of my porch. I shut the door on them. The window darkened as the light on the porch shut off. Odd. Maybe the motion detection stopped working. Some unbidden instinct told me to stay there and wait. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch as the 2 walked off. Still, the light stayed dark. My relief grew as the odd strangers left my property. But something didn't sit right. Something wasn't right. The light was working. It turned on when it detected me. It saw me. It didn't see the kids. The sensor was working. It was state of the art. passive infrared. It detected motion by detecting changes in temperature, like a human body. Like mine, but not the kids. Whatever was under those pristine white sheets wasn't warm at all. The realization washed over me like an ice cube running down my spine. My breath came in short rasps. I had to see. I had to know. I could barely bring my hand to the curtains. They were shaking so bad. When I pinched the edge of the curtain between my thumb and my finger, the curtain began to undulate wildly. I filled my lungs and peered out through the glass. They were still there, barely 20 yards away, doing nothing, just standing there, motionless, facing the street. As I watched, they both swiveled their heads, in perfect tandem, to affix two pairs of fathomless eye holes on the window. There was no way. There was no way they could have seen me come to the window. I had to put the back of my hand in my mouth and bite down hard to keep from calling out. They knew. They knew I was there. I backed away from the window, dragging my leaden feet over the carpeted floor. I barely noticed when my heel knocked the can back. The beer leaked out onto the carpet, leaving a widening patch in front of me. I couldn't believe the raw, animal fear those two had summoned up in me. Every instinct I had told me to run, get help, anything but stay and be trapped in my own house. What could I do? Call the police and tell them that I was scared of two little children trick-or-treating? Call one of my friends past midnight and ask them to come over like a little boy crawling to his parents' room after a nightmare? The situation was ridiculous. My mind told me so, that there had to be a rational explanation for everything, but I could not explain away the light, fluttery feeling in my stomach. I could not rationalize the prickly lump at the back of my throat. They'd only said 3 words to me in those unearthly tones. Who knew how cold those lips were? I shut the door to the kitchen, the sound echoing through the empty house. I turned my chair to face the front door, and then I waited, white-knuckled, for the dawn to come. I must have fallen asleep sometime during that long, cold wait, not daring to move from my chair, paralyzed with fear that one of those shrouded children would appear at my window, or worse yet, behind me. But even that manic store of energy wore out as the night wound to a close. I was woken up by a polite knock on the front door. I sat bolt upright, nearly falling off my chair. I stumbled to the door, a hint of the dread from a few hours ago still lingering like a stale funk in the air. I checked the peephole again. This time, I was confronted with the well-scrubbed face of one of our town deputies. We had been to school together. It was that kind of smallish town where you'd know almost everybody your age if they had a history there. He was an earnest man, tough but fair. "Good morning, officer." "Good morning," he replied. The sour look on his face told me that it was anything but that. His nose twitched as he took in the stale, sour smell of beer steaming off the floor in the morning sun. "Had a good night last night?" I thought back to the night before. No, I didn't. The lawman was quick to see the fleeting shadow of doubt wash across my face. He pressed home his advantage. "You care to explain why you stole the 2 mannequins from the store, dressed them up, and put them on your front lawn?" He shifted to the side, and past his door-filling bulk, I saw 2 familiar shapes on my lawn. My lungs wouldn't fill with air. They were still there. They'd been there the whole time. "You okay, buddy?" The big man leaned in, blocking my view, and steadied my shoulder with one of his strong hands. I brushed his hand off and lurched out into the yard, mindless of the freezing dew on my bare feet. The pair stood there, the draped sheets joined in between them. They were holding hands. The 2 of them were holding hands. I brought my palm down gingerly on the head of the one nearer to me. Hard. I felt hard plastic. I whipped the sheet off with one smooth motion. I gave a strangled cry as I stared into the empty green eyes of a child mannequin. I backed away, too quick. I ended up on my ass on the cold grass, clawing and scrambling backwards until I bumped into the solid legs of the deputy behind me. He'd been quick to recognize my unease earlier. He was just as quick to realize genuine fear. He hoisted me back to my feet and helped me back into my house. Mind telling me what that was all about? He dumped me on the office chair in front of my computer. I tried, but I couldn't force the words out. The deputy sighed and settled onto my couch, wrinkling his nose at the empty beer cans on the side table. He leaned forward. "First call of the morning after Halloween, and I'm chasing down some bullshit break-in to a store in the middle of the town. Now I've got you hungover and scared shitless from a damn pair of dolls on your front yard. What I know is someone got into a store, smashed up the glass, stole sheets and a couple of mannequins. Bloody kids again. Except the glass." The lines on his brow deepened. I watched his Adam's apple bob up and down. The glass was on the outside of the shop only. Damnedest thing. "You've got a camera on your yard, don't you?" I nodded numbly. "What say you give me another 10 minutes of your time, tops?" We go through that footage. I see who put those things on your lawn, and then I'll be out of your life. Hopefully, for good. I turned to face my computer and called up the stored videos on my hard drive. They were all transferred by Wi-Fi. Convenient for the time that I had bought the cameras. Just put on double speed backwards. We'll see who set them there soon enough. I hit the reverse play key and upped the speed. I saw the two of us scuttle from the house to the lawn and back again, then the first rays of sun retreating from the grass, pulling back over the pair of figures until they were back in darkness. The two of them stood there, motionless for the longest time. When the two figures moved all by themselves in a jerky swaying motion back from my lawn to my front door, the cursor danced a little jig in the corner of the screen as the shakes returned, stronger than before. The sharp hiss behind me told me I wasn't alone in my discomfort. I shuddered as I watched myself on screen, so close to the two abominations, giving them a handful of candy each. I slowed the recording back to normal speed. On screen, I saw myself turn back into the house to retrieve the candy. The two figures stood there, impassive. As one, they both fixed those dark eye holes on the sheets on the camera. There was something else unmistakable. There was a slight pulse in the sheets, a small undulation. The mannequins were breathing. I've seen enough. I turned to look at the deputy, his face as white as the sheets on the shrouded figures on the screen. His hand tight around the grip of his sidearm. That, of all the things, scared me most of all. A symbol of law and order, who had seen the worst of what our little community had to offer, just as scared as I was and ready to pull a gun in my house. I clicked the window shut and got up. I wandered over to my cabinet. I pulled out a pair of tumblers and a bottle of the good stuff. The bottle gave a couple of contented glugs as I sloshed the rich golden whiskey into the glasses. I set one down in front of the other man and took a sip from my glass. A lawman could lose his job drinking on duty. The deputy didn't hesitate when he emptied half his glass. He didn't look at me when he spoke. My old Nan wasn't from around here. She was back from the old country across the sea. She hated Halloween, said there were things out that night that weren't meant to see the light of day. One night a year, she told me, for one single night, some things were set loose. The candy and costumes were a new thing. Back in the past, on All Hallows Eve, good folk crossed themselves and prayed and stayed in. Whatever's on that recording, it's not what our town needs. You understand? Dumb high school kids, I said, the lie taking shape and form in my mouth, fooling around. The lie fleshed out, took on a veneer of credibility that would be the explanation. No one had to know the dark kernel of that story. And your camera? It was having technical difficulties that night. Never was a good piece of equipment. Regretted buying it the same week. He stuck out his hand and we shook on it. I have kept my word to now. There isn't a good reason why I broke my promise. I'd never known true fear till that night, but I replay it in my head over and over. The recording is long gone, of course, but every detail of that night has been branded on my mind. I remember the fear, but I cannot think of a single action the two of them had done to threaten me. Eerie, unnatural, but without a drop of malice. It'll be Halloween soon. I know where I'll be on that dark night. Some things roam the streets that shouldn't be there. The masks and the costumes aren't always for the children. Sometimes they're there for the adults, for our own protection. After the deputy left, I watched the video forwards, just once. I remember seeing the two figures on my lawn, slowly inching their hands up, locking them under the sheets and waiting for the sun to rise. Things that shouldn't be out on this good earth, but sometimes, just sometimes, they just want the simple things, like one last trick or treat.
Really good.
I like it.
I like it. So my favorite thing about creepypastas is this element of I have this story but no evidence.
Right.
And there's always like a good reason for it, right? Whether it's because they use first perspective and they die in the story, but like there's usually something like there's reason for doubt. But trust me, you just gotta trust me. And it's really good. Really well done.
There is this is just me being me again.
Yeah.
But there's something like weirdly sad about like the last part where like they held hands knowing that, you know, they were going to be mannequins again in the morning, but they just wanted to experience trick-or-treating. That's all they wanted.
I would let ghosts possess mannequins so they could go trick-or-treating if I had an option, if I had the opportunity, the authority, I'd allow it.
I would, under the condition that they come nowhere near me. Monsters, like cute orange-haired
Sure.
monsters, sure. Mannequins, nah, I'm good.
I think I'd probably react better to mannequins, honestly. I don't want to test this theory by any means.
I was gonna say, well, I mean, we could find out, but please, please don't.
Yeah, mannequins and dolls usually don't freak me out too much. Like, I think it's a good quality when we see it in horror, right?
Right.
I look forward to it. It's one of those things that makes you go, "Oh god, that's terrible." No, no, I'm here for it. Whenever it happens, I'm like, "Ee, yay."
Hey, yay.
Just like that. Very low key. I like that. That was a good little
It
random
was cute.
find that you had.
I
I
liked it.
like it. Good
Um,
job.
thanks.
Mine, but what we're going to close out with, right? Last story of our, I say evening because it's evening here, but for our video, is going to be the Russian sleep experiment. And this is like what I think creepypasta. This is the first thing I think of besides Who Was Phone. Besides that one, this is the first thing I think of. And I'm excited to read it out loud. I think I've only read it once or twice, but I've heard it a few different times. And so I don't know. I'm just excited to contribute to all those who have read it before. It's really cool. Trigger warnings for this case, it's going to be talking about government experiments, mental health, mental institutions, scientists, authority figures, abuse of power, that kind of stuff, right? It's very old school psychology meets horror. It's probably the best way to encapsulate all that. So if you're not into that, I understand. It's a long one, so more importantly, wanted to put that little disclaimer there. Okay, Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and toilet, enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained of having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on darker aspects after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternating whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but he was only able to produce the occasional squeak. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about his behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of their captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response. "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could really call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of that water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects had also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh they had ripped away and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives, if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle of the 4 living subjects that had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. One heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word "more" over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that had given him to prepare him for surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempted to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically impossible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so this patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 subjects were given to the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attendance researchers with their eyes, the paralytic clearing their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All three subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of the military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back to the gas. It was obvious that at this point, all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for the EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from his brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between his eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. Descriptive. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed as the remaining members of the medical and research team flood the room. I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you, he screamed at the man strapped to the table. What are you? He demanded. I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? The subject asked. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out. So nearly free. That's it.
No, I want more.
So this was, again, was big. It came out in 2012. At least that's what the CreepyPasta has. I think the Wikipedia has it as 2010. Credit to user Orange Soda. And it was one of those ones that made the rounds and people thought was for real, for real. Like this was a real experiment that happened. But it's come out that it's a falsehood. It's just a creepypasta. People rumor mill that there's gonna be a movie made out of it at some point. But that's the Russian sleep experiment.
I want more.
I want more. It's good, right?
It's
Choice.
so good.
A classic, truly. Again, when I think creepypasta, first one that comes to mind. Have you heard the Russian sleep experiment?
I love that.
Right?
I'm about to go on a deep dive into the Russian sleep experiment now.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Hope you all do too.
This
was fun. I liked sharing some. I think if we do this again, would we do this again? Should comment. Let us know. Should we do this again? I want to do the thing that you did. I'm just trying to find random ones and see how it plays out. You picked some really good ones. So A+.
Thanks. My horror intuition was like, these seem good.
A bit. This one. This was super fun. I know I just said that. Creepy season, spooky season. Yeah. It's fun to read scary stories, and I think I'm gonna spend way too much time on this. I was telling Amber before we recorded, like literally today before we recorded, I was doing some last minute research just to see, oh hey, are there any creepy stories that we can include? And I found on YouTube a 17-hour creepypasta iceberg video. One video, 17 hours. And I was so disappointed in myself that I didn't see it sooner. So I could have watched 17 hours worth of creepypasta. We maybe next time. Maybe next time I'll talk about that experience.
Yeah, please watch that and then tell me everything.
It'll be about 17 hours worth of information that I get
Good.
to regurgitate back to you. So
Good.
there's that. There's that. Well, until next time, right? Check out our merch. It's awesome. It's amazing. It's in the description below. Hats, stickers, mugs, sweaters, all of it. Go check it out. And then when you get that, you should definitely hop over to our Discord and say, look at the stuff we got. And we'll be like, woo, amazing. Yeah, let's go watch a movie or something. That's the gist. That's our stuff. That's where you can find us. That's how you can support us. And if you can, I mean, this first part should be easy. Like, subscribe if you like the content. If you're into it, if you want to see more, be sure to do the like, do the subscribe, and go ahead and put a little comment down below. We love hearing from y'all. And maybe if you have a creepypasta that you're really into, you can share it in the link and we'll be sure to give it a read as well.
Yes.
Until next time, until our next little campfire creepy story, where can we find you, Amber?
You can find me on all socials at Amber Blitz and on Instagram at Amberlin, AmberlinFX. You can also predominantly find me on Twitch, also at Amber Blitz, every Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. West Coast time.
You can find me on all socials at Roll for Alex, except I use it primarily to promote and I don't really use it that often. So cutting out the middleman, which is what we're saying every time now. Here's the skinny. Here's where you can find me, right? Place number 1, Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on YouTube with the Games Tavern. I'm on a 5th edition actual play show called Whiskey, Magic, and Destruction. And then on Sundays, I'm with the Exquisite Corpse Presents over on Twitch. And it's always this first L part that strikes me funny. But with Renaissance du Reign, which is a King Arthur alternative universe actual play where we're using the Thirsty Sword lesbian rule set, and that is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, as we're nearing our creepy spooky month, our favorite month of the year, you can also find me with Exquisite Corpse Presents, as they're doing a whole month full of actual plays with a ton of storytellers, a bunch of new people hitting those tables. I will be running a game. I'll actually be using Through the Breach, which we've talked about way back in our very first video. So if you want to see what I was talking about there, be sure to tune into Exquisite Corpse Presents. I'll also be in 2 other games. And when I say there's so many people, I think there's like 20 games that are going to be played over the course of the month. And that I think, if I remember correctly, if it's not 20, it's awfully close. There's a lot of people coming out. So you don't want to miss out on all those spooky, creepy stories. There's some wholesome ones. There's going to be some creepy ones. I'm very excited. So otherwise, until next time, be sure to check under your bed for monsters, because sometimes I forget to ask you to. And because I can't.
And I won't, unless you have a lot of cute orange fur.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.